Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Great to see you all. Hope you're all fit and well. I guess most are working at home. I'm joined by my good friend, Nick Baggott, who's joining us today. Hi, Nick. So we're just going to kick off, but before we dive into the slides, let us know where you are today, what the weather's like. Is it sunny? Is it cold? I keep hearing about this cold snap that's coming. I'm in Birmingham. I haven't seen any sign of it yet. It was nice and sunny this morning, but yeah, let us know who's on board, if you're joining us, where you're joining us from. Always good to see, and welcome everybody. So Lindsay, good morning. In Glasgow, okay. Hope the weather's all right, not too cold. Rory, sunny London, okay, good. Helen from Porthcawl in South Wales. Hope I pronounced it correctly. I don't know. Apologies if I haven't. Good to have you on board. James in St Ives, good to have you on board. Anna in London, great. Thanks for joining. Jean in London, weather is not bad. Good to hear. I'm glad it's not too bad. Yeah, I do keep hearing about that, but I think it's one of those things. It's always a couple of days away, isn't it? Always a couple of days away. Sometimes it doesn't even arrive, or it seems to anyway. So there we go. So thanks. Great to have you on board, everyone. So today, really good session. I think you're going to enjoy it. I think yeah, it's called 6 Steps to Building an Audience-Driven Social Marketing Plan, and Nick's going to take you through the main content for today's session. So we'll be diving into that in just 1 or 2 minutes. If it's the first webinar that you've joined with us at CrowdControlHQ, welcome. I'm just going to quickly talk you through who is CrowdControlHQ. So CrowdControlHQ is a UK-based social media management platform, and we can support you in 4 key areas. So the first is around engaging. So if you've got if you need to use social media as a key channel to engage your customers or consumers or residents or tenants or whoever it might be, CrowdControlHQ is designed to help you do that in a sort of efficient way, and you can collaborate with team members and with full visibility of all the work that you're doing around your social content. The second is around management, so how you can get efficiencies around managing, in some cases, very high volumes of social media activity, whether that's inbound messages or outbound messages. You can do it across teams and at scale very easily. The third is around analysing your social media activity and efforts. So what's working, what's not working, where are there opportunities, what are the trends that you're seeing with your own social media accounts and content. You can see all that in one nice sort of easy to see dashboard with lots of drill down options as well to see the details behind all of the stats. And the last thing is around Succeed. So yes, we're a social media management software company, but we're here to support you with hand-holding, all the guidance and best practices advice to make sure that social media is working and delivering for your organization, whatever it is that your main objective is for social media. And we work with many different organizations across the UK, public sector and private sector. And there's a few logos here on the screen. You might recognize some of the organizations, but there's many more. So if you've got any questions or you want to hear sort of insights and stories from some of the other work that we're doing with some of these types of organizations, don't hesitate to get in touch. And that's the little sales pitch over. So now, Nick, if you're still there, I'm going to hand over to you for the main content of today's session.
Thank you very much, Dan. And presume, Dan, you can hear me still?
Yes.
Yep, fantastic. Dan, I don't seem to have control over the slides for clicking forward. I don't know if you need to make me a presenter. Oh, there we go.
Do you want to give it another go? I think you should have.
No. Well, let me click forward. Okay. Whilst you do that, I'll introduce myself. So welcome everybody to this particular session. So my name's Nick Baggott, and I'm a self-employed digital marketing trainer and consultant. I'm also course director for the Chartered Institute of Marketing. My background is that I used to work in the agency world. There we go, Dan, we're on now, so I'll just go back, thank you. Yes, used to work in the agency world, set up my own agency a number of years ago, grew it to one of the largest independent agencies in the UK, and then we sold it to Publicis. And when we sold the agency to Publicis, I then became self-employed, decided not to join the new company, and have been working for the last 13 years doing kind of training, consulting around digital CRM, working with clients like Microsoft globally, and obviously Institute of Marketing, as I mentioned before. I'd be very happy for you to get in touch afterwards. You see my LinkedIn and Twitter details on the slide just there. I thought we'd start off. I can't really get you all to introduce yourselves today because there's 31 of you and you're all on mute. So I thought I'd just start off with a couple of quick polls, which is probably just a good way of me learning a little bit about who is in the session today. So if you want to hopefully you should be able to click on this now. If you want to click on each one, we should be able to see whether you work in B2B or B2C. I can see lots of you voting now, which is fantastic. Just give you a couple of seconds to do that. It looks actually, interestingly, that just about half of you are public sector, not-for-profit clients. I guess that reflects some of the client base that Dan mentioned before for crowd control as well. But actually, a pretty even split between B2B and B2C apart from that. So if I hit the close button, I think you should be able to now see that. And I thought I'd just quickly ask one other quick poll question for you as well. So I will just just hide that one and ask you another one, which is probably a bit more pertinent for today as well in terms of how much you're involved with social media within your marketing role that you have at the moment. So is it completely your job, or is it something that you are doing as part of a wider role, and whether you're using it at all at the moment as well. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that as well. Whilst you're voting as well, just to say that as we go through today's session, if you have any questions for me or for Dan, then just type them in the chat box. We'll take most of the questions at the end. You are kind of muted, but Dan's going to keep an eye on it as we go. So if there's anything really pertinent or anything, or anyone's got any tips like slow down, Nick, you're speaking too fast, or anything like that, then Dan will interrupt me and ask. But otherwise, we'll take them at the end. So let me now just let you know what you said for that. So it looks like for most of you, you have some involvement with social, and about a third of you, it's kind of your main focus. But for most of you, and it's pretty common from the clients that I talk to, actually, that most people now have some element of social within their role. Okay, Dan, I seem to have lost the ability to click forward again onto the next slide. There we go. I thought we'd add in a few slides at the start of the presentation. Originally, we wrote this a few weeks ago, and then Dad and I were chatting last week and were saying, well, actually, it'd be daft not to talk about how the world has changed over the last 2 or 3 weeks, really, at the start. So obviously, there's a new normal now. You're probably all viewing this from your home offices. If you look, I've actually got a bed in the background here. I'm in my home office, which is also doubled up as a spare room occasionally. So we're probably all homeschooling children. Some of you might have children on your laps as you're watching this at the moment, or trying to do the homework for the people at the same time. Obviously, we're all social distancing, we're home working, we're all remote teams, and obviously that has quite a big impact on brands. One of the key things, obviously, is there's less actual face-to-face customer contact. So we're relying more on technology, whether it be social media posts or whether it be things like this, live meetings, virtual training, etc. So perhaps social is going to have even more of a prominent role communicating going forward. And for your wider teams, I presume if you're in business to business, for example, it's much harder for your sales team to get out face-to-face with clients, etc. And even who knows how it's going to change once all this is over. Will people get used to working from home, get used to working remotely, and not necessarily want to have all those face-to-face meetings? Event attendance is something I can see being hit a great deal in the long term now. Will companies want to fly people around the world to attend conferences and things like that? So I suspect we're going to become more reliant on technology, and particularly social media, as we go forward. Obviously, customer and businesses' priorities are changing, and I'll show you a couple of quotes in a second from clients that I've been speaking to in the last week, which really kind of demonstrates that. But the services that your customers require from you and things that are important to your business may be different today than they were 3 weeks ago. I think there's also been a huge focus in the last few weeks about brands that are behaving ethically or unethically, and a lot of that is being shared on social. You probably remember right at the very start of all of the social distancing, there was lots of stories about employers treating their employees really badly. I remember there was one with a hotel that immediately closed the hotel, kicked out all their staff, and because they let all their staff go, they also kicked them out of the hotel rooms that they were sleeping in. So they're not only did they get rid of their staff, they made them all homeless at the same time. And the impact of doing something like that and people sharing it on social, comparing that to someone like Gary Neville, who immediately made his hotel, kept all his staff on, made it available to NHS, the brand impact he had and how that was shared so much. Most of us probably saw his video that he first put on Instagram because the ability of social media to share those good and bad stories. So I think how ethically you behave is becoming more and more important and easier for people to share. And the other thing which you'll see on the next slide as well is that it's become really, really important that that we think about the messaging and what's appropriate. So here are some examples from conversations I've had with some of my clients over the last week or so. The first one from a large global packaging business, makes food packaging, and they've said they've had to completely change the messaging on all of our ads. Their advertising was they're about to run a large advertising campaign promoting new products and services. They've had to scrap everything that they've done and replace it with ads about how they're going to keep the production lines going and how they're going to keep servicing people and how they're going to keep the business afloat and keep looking after their customers. So they literally had to scrap one campaign and instantly create a new one to use. One of the large B2B management services companies I work with, they've said we need to find a new way to reach our customers since we can't see them face to face anymore. Another one, I work with a big food organization. They said sales of snacks are through the roof. We need to focus on the products that people want now and reduce the range we produce to keep the factory running efficiently. One of their product lines is a range of biscuits, and they said they've literally sold twice as many biscuits in the last month than they've ever sold in any month in history. And that's not only because people are stocking up and stockpiling, but also because people are snacking because they're bored and frustrated at home and want comfort eating effectively. So it's having a huge impact on our business. And one of the great advantages of social media is it allows you to react very quickly, to listen to customers, to empathize with customers, to change your messaging, change your proposition. If you're running TV ads, it's very difficult to change. If you're running an ad in a press magazine that runs monthly, not only does the magazine not get delivered at the moment, probably, may not even be getting produced, but also you've had to send that artwork weeks in advance, where social allows you to respond so much quicker. So I thought I'd just give you the opportunity to write in here as well, just to finish off this first section about write in chat how the new normal has affected the messages that your brand needs to convey now. So have any of you got any similar issues in terms of the things that you've had to change in terms of your messaging over the last few weeks? While I give you a chance to do that, Dan, I can see my chat, but I can't see other people's chat for some reason in my chat box. So
if you want to just send your comments into the questions box instead, if the chat isn't.
Yeah, when you asked the question where people were earlier, I couldn't see their responses for some reason.
I think if you use the little questions box, I think it's going to come through.
Okay.
To your previous point, I think, yeah, I got definitely one of those that's been snacking a little bit more. So I've probably contributed to the increase in the biscuit sales.
Okay. Yeah, so I've seen somebody there said we've stopped hard call for action messages. Absolutely, kind of the real salesy messages, trying to be kind of much more empathetic to people as well. There, that's great. Sorry, I'm trying to. I can only see one comment. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll move on to the next thing, and we'll try and fix that for the next question I ask you. So some key trends in social media just before we go into kind of how we plan it. So things that I'm going to kind of talk about over the course of the day. So earned media is absolutely crucial. So over time, if you think about media being owned, earned, and paid, what we're seeing is a swift change from people moving away from paid media and into relying on earned media, so including that peer-to-peer sharing, as I was discussing. Influencing influencers, really, really important. It's very hard to reach every consumer that we want to reach, and it's probably a very cost-efficient way to do it is by getting people who have influence to share your message, whether that be the kind of micro-influencer who's specialist in your industry sector, or kind of more of a kind of celebrity influencer in the same way. Particularly because of the social media algorithms and how they're changing, it's becoming harder and harder to reach all of your audience, even from the people that follow you already. So Facebook, for example, might only deliver to 10% of your followers in a message. So by using influencers, you can reach a much wider audience and also have the endorsement of that influencer as well. All of this means that content has become more important, and content marketing is really a switch away from paid media towards owned and earned media. So content marketing is where, instead of us broadcasting messages in the hope that people will respond, content marketing is where you create content that people can find when they're ready to buy. You create content that might be blogs or videos, for example, which people, when they're searching in Google, will find. So people focusing on inbound marketing rather than that kind of push outbound marketing. Which means that thought leadership is more important, particularly in business-to-business markets. I know quite a few of you were in business-to-business. Some of you are obviously in public sector businesses as well, where it's very important that you're seen to be kind of leading the conversation and being seen as trusted experts. So thought leadership content is particularly important. And personalization is becoming more and more key in all digital channels. So, what we see in our search when we look is personalized to us. The ads that we see are personalized to us. The recommendations for e-commerce sites are recommended to us. So as a brand, how are you capturing information from consumers, particularly behavioral data, and personalizing that message accordingly? So they're kind of some of the key stages. So this is all about planning a campaign. So now we'll come into the different stages. So a few years ago, I got together with two other members of the CIM faculty, Marina Lumley and Graham Hansel, and we decided that we would look at the planning models that are used on all the CIM courses and review them in terms of kind of the way people work in today's environment. CIM used to use historically SOSTAC, which is a very academic planning process, something that you kind of learn at university but probably never use in your career. So we wanted to create something that our clients could use that was kind of much more reflective of the way that we work. So this is quite a complicated diagram, so I'll kind of walk you through it gradually, but effectively there are 6 stages of the model. This isn't hopefully news to you. It should be similar to the way you work now with maybe a few tweaks. So we start off with our objectives. Once we've got our objectives, we then try and understand our audience. So our objectives might be to increase sales or increase engagement or something like that. Once we've got our objectives agreed, we then have to understand what people are doing now. So we might segment your audience into groups. For each group, we then might do some research. That research could be desk research, it could be bespoke research you create for yourselves, or it could be just playing around with social media and seeing what happens and testing and learning social media. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Once you've done your research, the next stage is to turn your information that you get from research into a customer insight, and we'll talk about that a bit later on today as well. What is the difference between the information you get from research and the insight that you can derive from that? And that insight should then drive your strategy. And obviously your strategy should be who you're going to target, in which channel, and with what type of content effectively. And then once you've got your strategy in place, you can then activate the programs and measure it. And obviously measurement isn't something that happens 3 months after the campaign's finished. The great thing about social, particularly if you're using tools like CrowdControl, it allows you to measure as you go, effectively, and be agile and constantly test and learn and see what happens. You get the results literally almost instantaneously once the campaigns are starting, and you can keep adapting and changing and testing and learning as you go. So your measurement is a kind of continuous loop rather than a one-off activity that happens at the end of the campaign typically. So that's your kind of 6 stages, and I'll kind of walk you through this for the rest of this particular webinar. Then it's where, when we first created this model, we had consumer or customer in the middle of the model and said, well, it's all about changing the behavior of your customer. But we said, actually, the same model is applicable for different audiences as well, or different objectives. So you might have an objective around changing customer behavior. You might also have an objective around changing the perception of your brand. And that's probably something particularly important at the moment, where we talk about the ethics of your brand being really important kind of in today's environment. So how you're perceived by other people is very important. So you might be running campaigns at the moment just to make people feel that you're a responsible, ethical brand that treats your staff well, for example, as much as it might be something that is actually a more salesy related message. Obviously, you then have another key audience where you might have objectives which are not actually about the end customer, but about the channel, the people that sell your product, or the influencers that influence your consumer. And of course, you could use exactly the same model for internal comms as well. Again, today, probably more important than ever with internal comms, as your team are disparate and all working from home, then internal comms is probably taking more an important role than it was historically. So the same model could be used whichever objective that you are relating to. So if we look at objectives here, I'm going to just speed up a little bit here just to save myself some time for later on. So rather than asking this question, I'll just show you kind of the way we like to think about it. So in terms of objectives, obviously, and somebody just mentioned this actually when I was asking you earlier on how your kind of new normal is changing the way that your communication is working. Historically, we might be a bit more focused on sales related messages, whereas perhaps today we're a bit more focused on engagement related objectives as well. So a sales objective is obviously moving somebody through that buying process, trying to change their behavior. If you work in public sector, you don't necessarily always sell something, but you're looking for a behavioral change that you would measure along that bottom dimension. For example, getting people to use the council services, or getting people to recycle more would be a good example, I guess, of where you'd replace purchasing behavior by behavioral change in a public sector type environment. And then on the other dimension, we have kind of whether people are engaging with your content. Now, the reason I've got these two things separate is if you actually measure it, you'll see that quite often you have a situation where you get people who are highly engaged, but actually not buying. You have other people who are buying from you habitually, but actually aren't engaged with your content as well. So you'll have kind of different people at different places. You might well have, think about your relationship with your car insurance company. I would imagine that you spend a lot of money on it, and financially there's money coming out every single month and you're renewing, etc. But you may not have much of an engagement with their marketing communications. You probably don't go to their website very often or attend events they attend. There might be other brands where you're highly engaged with their content, but actually you don't buy from them. Had somebody on a course recently from Rolls-Royce Cars, and they were telling me that they had something like 250,000 followers on some of their social media channels, but they only sell a few hundred cars a year. So they have high engagement and low volume of sales in that particular case. And that's fine if you're Rolls-Royce, because they're trying to make the product aspirational anyway. So it's useful to be able to kind of measure on both of those dimensions. And social media is particularly good at measuring engagement compared to other channels. If you compare a social media campaign with, say, a press ad campaign, or something like that. With a press ad campaign, you have no information apart from how many copies of that publication were distributed. It's very hard to get response and engagement type information, whereas on social, you get so much information on likes and clicks and shares and all sorts of other views that you need. And obviously, if you use some of the measurement tools, you can get even more. So that's the kind of first stage of objectives. The second stage is then research and understanding. Now, this is obviously something that CrowdControlHQ can help with, as Dan pointed out at the start of this presentation. So just kind of worth saying a couple of things that are important in terms of research and understanding your customers. The first thing is obviously understanding the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. You tend to get both types with social media measurement. You get the quantitative data, the numbers, things like how many likes and clicks and shares, but you can also get qualitative information, which is much more kind of open. What are people saying? What are people's comments? What are they talking about? What are they discussing? Those sorts of things as well. You can do surveys and polls, which would be quantitative. You can ask open questions, which are qualitative, in the same way that I did a poll at the start of this session, that was quantitative, and I tried to do a chat question earlier on, which was qualitative as well. So, social allows you to do both of those two things and help you understand your customers better. It's also worth saying as well in research that we have the difference between claimed and observed data. So claims data is if I say something to you like, are you a user of social media, and you have to answer my question, you're claiming the answer. Observed is if I was able to actually put a bit of software onto your computer or your phone and track what you do. So Vodafone, for example, would get observed data on your behavior online because they can actually track everything you're doing on your device. Whereas if I'm asking a question in social media, then that's claimed. Now, claim data often gives you misleading answers, and that's partly because people don't always know the answer, and sometimes because they give you a more politically correct or more socially acceptable answer as well. So for example, in the general election, you tend to find the Conservative Party do slightly worse in opinion polls and slightly better when it comes to the actual results themselves, and that's partly because of when the interviewer stops you in the street, you want to give someone a socially acceptable answer, and some answers are more acceptable than others. The Green Party do really well in opinion polls, but they don't actually get many votes because it makes you look a good person if that's what you say. Similarly, if you ask somebody a question like how many web pages have you looked at in the last month, you're going to get a pretty inaccurate answer. Sometimes people just don't know the answer. Sometimes they're not able to give you a good answer. So just something to bear in mind when you're doing research. I'm a big fan of doing data profiling as well. And once you start getting respondents into your campaigns, then you can take the responders and compare them to the non-responders and see what it tells you. And just to give you an idea of what the power of data profiling, this is obviously not a campaign, but I thought it was something easy that I could show you. So this is the profile of voters for the Conservative Party versus the Labour Party and the other parties in the last UK general election just before Christmas of this year. You'll see the huge difference that age makes. Most people thought the big difference in voting was around things like social class, whether you were working class or you were upper class or middle class, or even whether you were a Brexiteer or not a Brexiteer. But actually the biggest differentiator was age. So you can see here the difference in the votes by age. So if you take the 70 pluses, 2/3 of them voted Conservative, whereas only 22% of the 18 to 19s voted Conservative. And if you put that into context, if in the last general election only the 18 to 24s had been allowed to vote in the UK, Labour would have got 600 seats and the Conservatives would have got 0. If you took only the 65 pluses, Conservative would have had 575, Labour would have had 25. So there's a huge amount you can learn from just doing simple data profiling of your results. There's a brilliant research portal out there that many people are not aware of. Google have a whole suite of research tools. There's a sneaky trick here, which I'll tell you today. By the way, you'll get sent this recording, and we'll make the PDF available to people as well. That's a common question we get asked. And on the PDF, you'll be able to use some of these links. If you click on this particular link that you see on the screen there, thinkinsights.appspot.com, it takes you to Google USA's research portal. The Google UK version of Think Insights only has about 4 or 5 free research tools on it. The American version of it, which that takes you direct to, has about 15 or 16 free research tools. And in each research tool, you can then select your country. So you can still get UK data, but the tools have it. The reason for that is that media agencies are not very keen on Google giving away all these tools for free. And in the UK, they decided to back down and not make them all free. Whereas in America, they decided to go ahead anyway. Now, one example of the tools in this particular research portal that you can get, which you can actually get in the UK one and the American one, is Google Trends. And in fact, Google Trends is their probably most commonly used research tool, and you can actually access this by just Googling Google Trends and finding it. It's the one that's most accessible. But Google Trends tells you how many people have searched for any particular word in any geography over any period of time. Now, just for a bit of local kind of recent relevance, I put into the tool earlier on home delivery versus Ocado, and you can see how the over the last 30 days, how the number of people searching for it in Google has exponentially risen over the last few weeks. Exponentially is the word that now everybody understands thanks to the coronavirus. So you can see how the huge sharp increase in people searching. And if you've tried to get a delivery spot for any home delivery of food, you'll have experienced a similar thing yourself. But that's just a great example of showing. Now you can use Google Trends for helping you predict when to do things, also to kind of measure things as well. So sometimes you might want to see if the number of searches has gone up for your brand name pre and post campaign to see if it's had any impact on the number of searches. but also you can use it for kind of planning in future. So for example, I was working with the university recently, and we put in how many people search for apply to university as the phrase, and we did it over the last 5 years, and you can see that you have exactly the same spikes every single year for the last 5 years. There are certain times of the year when most people are searching, which actually turns out to be the first week of September, when sixth form students go back into school and their teachers say, right, you better sign up for some open days before the UCAS deadline in January. So you can understand kind of when the peaks are and time your advertising and marketing to match those peaks if you use a tool like Google Trends. So that's kind of research generally. Obviously, from a social media point of view, as I mentioned before, you can obviously profile your followers. You can run polls and ask questions within social media. You can see an example there from Starbucks. But you can just test and learn things, just try things, see what happens. And that's, there's no cost to doing it apart from potential brand reputational risk. So if in doubt, just ask, just try things and see which ones get response, which don't, which audience are responding to which types of posts, what time of day works best for you for posting. There are, tools that will tell you which time of day you've historically had the most interactions on, but just try testing, sending out your post in the morning or the afternoon, and you will notice a difference, and it will be different for each of you. There isn't a golden rule because it depends on your audience effectively and what their behaviors are and what it is that your message is all about. And of course, which social channels work best for which type of content and also for which types of consumer for you. So through the Institute of Marketing last year, I did some work with Asda, the food retailer, and they took a decision to effectively segment their social activity using different channels for different audiences. So for example, they use Instagram and YouTube for targeting young families and students setting up home for the first time. And they use Facebook for talking to families with older children, kind of the traditional mum buying her food shop, as it were. So it doesn't ban you if you're a mother from using Instagram, but the content they're creating is more targeted to them. Certainly my wife works in a very expensive private school. She's the bursar, so she sends all the bills out to all the parents, and they use Facebook for talking to parents of the existing children because they're mostly boarding and they want to share what the children are up to, and they use Instagram for making it aspirational for other people to go to the school. It's a very aspirational school with lots of celebrity children, with lots of influencers, and those people like to show off that their children go to that school. You might have seen in the past a very famous photograph of Princess Diana winning the mum's race in school sports day with her arms kind of out as she goes across the finishing line. That was taken at their school sports day. So that kind of gives you an idea of the types. So they're using Instagram in that case to make it kind of aspirational for future parents to want to go there potentially. So that's kind of using social, and Dan's already talked you through this already, but that was just to kind of remind me that obviously you can use tools like CrowdControlHQ to help you with that. Another tool that I really like if you're a Twitter user is a thing called Followerswonk. It's a free tool. As long as your follower, if you've got less than 25,000 followers, you can run the report for free. You have to kind of set up a username and account, but it's very quick to do, and then you can do it for free. It's quite simplistic, but one of the things it allows you to do is see where geographically your followers are. It actually zooms down right down to street level, showing where your followers are. So if you're running an event, you can see how many of your followers are actually in that event. If this was a live event in a conference room, for example, in a big hotel somewhere, I could zoom in on that and see how many of you were actually in the room. And it also allows you to see who the most influential people are that follow you. So this is looking at CrowdControlHQ's Twitter account, and this shows some of the people that follow them and how long they've been following them for and what their social influence score is as well. So it would allow Crowd Control to find influencers to potentially share things like this webinar to increase the reach without necessarily spending any money. And you can do it for any Twitter account. It doesn't have to be your account. The great thing about Twitter is it's an open platform. So when you use tools on Twitter, you can analyze your account, but you can also analyze competitor accounts and other people's accounts as well, partners and people like that. Whereas channels like Facebook and Instagram are not open public platforms. So as a result, you can only see things about your own account in most cases. So that's your kind of research side of your social planning point of view. Once I've done my research, I can now start to really have a think about how to segment my audience and then go on and produce insights and ultimately create content for your audience. So when you're creating your, sorry, go on to here. When you're creating your segmentation model, there's all sorts of different data variables that you can potentially use for this. So traditionally, if it was a consumer brand, you might use demographics, and if it was a business brand, you might use the business demographics, the equivalent to company turnover, industry sector, and things like that. Now, interestingly, demographics are becoming less and less predictive of our behavior as society changes. So your age and gender, for example, are much less predictive of what you might buy or what you might do, where you might go on holiday, etc., than they used to be historically. You know, I'm a huge football fan. I actually work as a football scout part-time for a local championship football club. And when I started watching football, you know, a few years ago now, you go to a game when it was all working class men and mostly white men who were going to football games. Today, if you go to a game, it's multicultural, different ages, different genders, etc. So, you know, society has changed a great deal. So those demographics are becoming less and less predictive. And in fact, I was working with a big global consumer food brand last week, and they were telling me that when they build segmentation models, demographics are now banned in their segmentation listing. They're not allowed to use them anymore, partly because they're not accurate, and also partly they don't want to target people based on gender and race and things like that. So if we can't use demographics, or we want to use them less, what might we use instead? Obviously, we could use their geography. So do they live in the north or the south of the country? Are they rural versus urban? If you're a broadband provider, for example, things like rural versus urban is very important. But the key thing typically with segmentation in a social context, but actually in all digital marketing, is behavioral data. That's a great opportunity that that digital channels give you. So instead of saying, you know, I think because this person is a white working class man, they might be interested in football, which would have been the demographic way of doing it, they could say, well, I know they're interested in football because they subscribe to the Peter Crouch podcast, or they follow BBC Match of the Day on Twitter, for example, or they've been onto my website and they've looked at the video about football, for example. So behavioral data is accessible to all of us because it's basically how people interact with us. What emails do they open? What events do they attend? What pages of the website do they look at? What social media posts do they respond to, etc. And it's typically a lot more predictive. So what we're seeing is segmentation switching really away from the traditional of demographics and more towards behavioral type information over time as well. Some of the media planning agencies also use things like attitudinal data, needs-based data, but they tend to be used more for above-the-line media buying and much less used for things like social media posts and social media advertising. But it's a kind of still used from a kind of TV point of view sometimes. So just give an example of probably the most famous example of behavioral targeting. Imagine that you're a company that makes baby food and you're targeting people for your new product, and your new baby food product is actually a vegetarian baby food, and it is it's designed for kind of foodies, you know, people that kind of like to kind of experiment with different foods. So it's a kind of premium vegetarian baby food, and you're going to launch it in Tesco. So the first thing you need to do is identify the people who are most likely to buy it. Now, Tesco has huge amounts of behavioural data because they have a Tesco Club Card. So the first thing that Tesco's might want to do is find all the vegetarians. Now, how might you find a vegetarian if you are Tesco? Well, easily enough, by what you purchase in the store. Now, Tesco's made a big mistake when they first launched Club Card. They made the assumption that anyone who doesn't buy meat in Tesco must be a vegetarian. But of course, if you're a real carnivore and you really love your meat, you might buy your meat from the farm shop or a specialist butcher. So what you need is people who haven't bought meat, but also have bought meat substitutes. So they've bought corn, or they've bought a vegetarian pizza or something like that. And in reality, it's not a yes or no question to vegetarianism, because you might have one vegetarian in the family and 3 non-vegetarians, or you might have someone who just is not eating a lot of meat at the moment. They're not necessarily a ethical vegetarian, but they just want to cut back on their meat consumption. I've got a friend who claims to be vegetarian, but she eats bacon, for example. So you know, that's so it's kind of 0 to 100 scale. So that little thin strip of the Tesco Club Card database you can see there is the ones that are, say, scoring 98 to 100, almost certainly vegetarian. Then we need to find people who are gourmet cooks. So how does Tesco know you're a gourmet cook? Because you buy ingredients, you buy cookbooks, you buy cooking utensils and things like that. And interestingly, apparently the most predictive thing is if you buy sun-dried tomatoes. If you buy sun-dried tomatoes, you're a gourmet cook, according to Tesco. Apparently in all their data modeling, it's the most predictive thing you can buy. And then finally, how do I know if you've got a baby? Because you've bought nappies and things like that. So therefore, in the middle, we have the sweet spot, and Tesco can target just those people who are vegetarian gourmets with a baby. There might be 3,462 of them in the country, and they're the people who will get the Tesco Club Card offer for that particular product. So that is kind of the ultimate example of behavioural targeting in the UK. But of course, how does that relate back to social media? Well, it's pretty much the way that advertising can be managed within Facebook as well. So Facebook allows you to target your ads based on demographics or behaviors or geography in lots of different ways, but it tends to be the behavioral change that works best. Now, Match.com, I saw the marketing director of Match.com speaking at a conference recently, obviously a big dating website, and she was saying Facebook advertising has been fantastic for them because they target people obviously based on relationship status, but they target people as their relationship status changes. So literally the day you change your relationship status from married back to single or in a relationship back to single, they'll be straight in there targeting you with a Match.com message. And after the event, I was one of the speakers as well. So I asked her, isn't that a bit soon? You know, a bit brutal. Literally, you split up from someone, the next day you're getting a dating site advertising. And she said, it's not. It's the perfect timing, because the day you change your relationship status on Facebook is not the day you walk out on your other half or they walk out on you. It's the day you want to tell the rest of the world that you're single again and you're available. That's when you tend to get around to changing your status. So that's therefore the perfect time, because it's when you're ready to tell other people, which is why they do it. And that's a great example of the ability to target people based on behavior at kind of key times effectively. So that's your kind of impact on segmentation. So I just wanted to kind of finish off this section. I'm going to give you kind of 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Dan to ask me any questions that have been put in the chat box. So just to remind you again at this stage, if you haven't already, if you've thought of any questions, and type them either in the question section or the chat box, either of those, and Dan will ask me at the end any questions that pop up. So I've done my research now, I've done my segmentation. I now need to move to the next stage of insight in order to build my content strategy. So insight is all about understanding why people behave as they behave. So if you think about the research that we've done up until now, it would probably tell you who has done things, when they've done things, what they've clicked on. It'll tell you lots of more quantitative type data. It'll tell you the kind of that behavioral data. What it probably won't have told you is why they've done something, or indeed how I can get them to change their behavior. So if you think of something like recycling, if you're in public sector, for example, you might have information and research that tells you who recycles, how much they recycle, which postcodes recycle most. What insight is about is to understand why the people that recycle and why the people who don't recycle haven't, and indeed what I can say to the non-recyclers to encourage them to do so. And Diageo, the drinks company that has Guinness and Johnny Walker and those sorts of brands, they pioneered a new way of looking at insight a few years ago. And what they looked at was they realized that the best way to understand why people do things is not to ask them why they do things, but bizarrely to ask them why not. If you ask somebody, for example, why did you go on holiday to Spain last year? People give you some slightly vague answers. If you ask the same person, could you tell me any barriers that would put you off going to Spain? They'll give you a much more longer, much more detailed list typically. And there are sometimes rational things and sometimes emotional things. It might be a rational thing, like I can't afford to go to Spain, for example, because I can't afford the flight. Or there could be emotional things. Oh, Spain won't look great on Instagram, will it? You know, what will my friends think of me if I go to Spain? Surely I should go to somewhere, you know, like Mount Titicaca or somewhere which looks going to look better on Instagram, for example. It's more a kind of an emotional barrier to going there. So the two videos that I've got, I've put the links in so you can watch them later, because it's not very kind of practical in this sense to do it. But I thought I'd just talk you through this scenario, and you can watch the video if you're interested once we finish the webinar. So there's a fantastic award-winning campaign from Brazil where people were not donating blood in the blood banks. So they wanted to run a campaign to encourage people in poor cities, in areas of poverty and working, tough working environments, to go to the hospital to donate blood. Quite a difficult challenge when people aren't getting paid to do it. Then there's no incentive, there's no reward. People tended to only give blood when someone in their family was in hospital, but they wouldn't otherwise do it. So they did a piece of research to look at what the barriers were to stop them doing it. And they identified some rational barriers, like there's no transport system to get to the hospital I can afford, I can't get time off work, and a whole bunch of emotional reasons why they don't do it as well. Things like, I didn't think you'd be interested in my blood because I'm slightly malnourished. Why would anyone want my blood? Or I don't care enough about it, for example. What they identified in the end was that actually the only way you could really get people to do it is to say to them, well, actually, we're not getting enough people to do it just because their family are in hospital. We need people who've got no emotional connection with it to go and do it for the good of their community. So how do we get people to do it for the good of their community and raise awareness in a way without spending any money? What they actually ended up doing, and so you can watch the video if you're interested later on, is they got the big football team in that particular city of Bahia where they ran the campaign, who play in red and black striped shirts. They got that team to have a new strip for their kits. When they walked out on the first day of the season, instead of having red and black stripes on their shirts, it was just black and white stripes. Then on the big screen in the stadium, it said, we've always given our blood and sweat for you. Now it's your turn to give blood for your community. And we won't put the red stripes back onto the shirts of the football team until you as supporters go into the hospital and start donating blood. And then each week, red stripes started appearing on the shirts as more and more people did it, and they ended up hitting their target. So that was an idea that was kind of born out of the customer insight and trying to understand the barriers. Final thing, I've left the detailed messaging framework in here, so you can have a look at it later on to see how that whole insight process works and how the message were generated, so you can kind of review that later. Obviously, the final thing then is once I've got my customer insight, I can now start to create the actual creative idea that is going to run on the social media campaign. And in order to get that, you need your insight, which I said has a kind of rational and an emotional side, but you also need to understand what your brand stands for as well. There's the rational messaging, the kind of reason to believe and the features and benefits of your product. And then there's the emotional side of things, which is your kind of brand equity. What do you stand for as a business? Are you the type of business like Gary Neville that is going to treat their staff and their customers well and open up your hotel to the NHS? Are you the sort of business that's going to lay off all your staff and kick out all of your employees and make them homeless effectively? So kind of what is your brand equity? And that's the thing I was saying this morning at the start of this session is kind of particularly important right now. And if you can get those three things together, and give that as a brief to a creative person, they should be in a pretty good position to come up with a kind of winning creative idea. And then once you have that creative idea, these are some of the things you need to kind of think about in terms of great content. So your content, how do you know if the idea is good or not? Your content should be engaging, should be kind of interactive, encouraging people to do that. And storytelling, which I've mentioned at the end of this list, is a great way of doing that, kind of telling the emotional stories of the customers. Obviously, your content should be based on your customer need, should be integrated across multiple channels. Your social media campaign will work much better if it's integrated with your press advertising and your search advertising and everything else that you're doing. Then obviously should be a clear call to action, although as one of you said earlier on, maybe in these environments at the moment, being overtly salesy may not be the best thing right at the time being. Your call to action, however, might be click on this to donate to the NHS, or click on this to watch a video to see what we're doing to help our employees or our vulnerable customers at the moment. The call to action does not always have to be buy something now. It could be just follow us on Facebook, for example. Your creative ideas should be search friendly, should be social media friendly, which means kind of shareable ideas. If it's just buy this, buy that, here's a product offer, no one's going to share it. But if your content is more thought leadership based, more educational, more helpful, people are much more likely to share it. Authoritative is also important. So making sure your social media comes from someone who's a trusted, knowledgeable expert, using, in the way that Dan and Crowd Control have used me today as the authoritative expert to talk to you. Can you get guest posters, guest writers, bloggers, example to do that? Or within your business, get the technical experts to talk about it. So if it's recycling, rather than the marketing department creating the content, maybe the recycling content should come from the head of recycling or the person who's working in the recycling center, for example. And obviously it should always reflect your brand as well. So again, another video which you can watch at a later date. Final thing before I pass over to Dan for questions is just to talk about the different types of content you want to think about as well. So I think normally the best form of content you can create and the best value in social media is what we call evergreen content, which is something you might create today, which you can reuse for a long period into the future. So if you write a blog or create a video, host it on your website or on a separate site, and then you can have multiple social media posts linking back to it over time, you're going to get most value for money out of your content if you do that. Often our social media content is very event driven, product launches, conferences, exhibitions, etc., news that you want to talk about. Then you've got your topical things, and obviously I think using topical content is particularly important at the moment, but you just need to be very sensitive and wary. We don't want to be seen to be profiteering out of other people's misfortune, as it were. A really bad example of how not to do it, somebody told me recently that when the Grenfell Tower disaster was actually happening and people were burning in their apartments and people were dying, there was a smoke alarm company using hashtag Grenfell posting, if the company had used our smoke alarms, these people wouldn't be dying at the moment. So that is how not to do topical content. So you mustn't be seen to be exploiting people. Make sure that you're doing something which is adding value and helping people at the moment. And curated versus created, some of the things you share doesn't always have to be things that you've created. So on my Twitter account, I will share things where if I've written a new piece of thought leadership on my blog, but a lot of what I'm sharing is just other things I've seen from other people I think my audience will find useful. So I might share something that Dan's created for Crowd Control or something that I've just read online and thought, actually, I think my audience might be interested. I'll just retweet and share that as well. Okay, I've run out of time. Sorry, it was a little bit rushed at the end there, but I wanted to give Dan 10 minutes to ask me any questions that have come in from the group. So Dan, over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Nick. I mean, there's tons of information to take away from today's session. So yeah, we will share the recording afterwards, and we'll share the slides as well, because I think mentioned there's some links on some of the pages where you can get through to the tools and to the resources that you shared. So please, so hopefully you found the little questions box. If you've got a question, send it over, and we can share it now and have a chat around trying to help answering those. And also, Nick, I think we just slightly delayed, but I think we got some feedback on some of the other questions that you asked. Yes. Throughout, so I'm just going to refer back to those just while we're waiting for any new questions to come through. I think this was back to the earlier question around like, what are you doing? Like, how have you changed your how are you changing your social media activities because of the sort of current environment? So Kirsty says signposting people to information / update on service availability and opening hours, how business is affected. So I guess that's a change away from sort of maybe more promotional. So instead of trying to promote and sell products and services, you're just signposting to helpful content, which I think is probably
actually kind of related to that. Is a great example actually where people are now offering completely different products and services to what they were offering before. So my local pub around the corner, which obviously now not getting any trade at all, has got a garden which provides its produce, and it has suppliers which supply it with food and drink and everything else. So it's now basically become an e-commerce business, a food grocer, and it's basically offering basically you can buy vegetable boxes, you can buy meat packaging, and even they're delivering. Literally, I phoned up this morning and they're delivering in half an hour. Later on, and they're delivering milk and bread and all sorts of things that they're getting from their suppliers. So they've had to completely change their business model to kind of stay in business and help their customers. So that's a kind of good example of a completely different service message to the usual post about the pub quiz and things like that they're normally running.
Yeah, makes sense. Good example, really. So Lindsay says we're a funeral planning company, so we have to be really sensitive at the moment. Yep, makes sense.
Yeah,
But demand for services has gone up. Yep, I
have to
guess.
be very, very sensitive all the time if you're a funeral company, I would imagine. I've done some work with one of the big franchise funeral businesses in the past, and yeah, the complexity of messaging is probably more difficult for that than anything else I think I've ever worked with. I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people talking about how to try to be empathetic at the moment because of you don't know what people are going through. But I think actually, if you're working in that sector, then you might be a little bit more used to acting like that. But yeah, certainly it's a interesting time. So from Simon, moving our physical car dealership showroom messages to an online showroom with softer sales. Interesting, yeah.
Must be pretty tough trying to sell cars at the moment, I should think, when people can't go for test drives and things like that. So
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting, yeah. But yeah, it'd be interesting. So Simon, if you got any, if you want to share any more sort of comments on how that's going, like any insights or stories, it'd be really interesting.
I know estate agents are currently banned from showing people around houses, aren't they? My uncle is trying to sell his house to move into a retirement home at the moment, and he's really struggling because they're not allowed to show viewers around. They're having to do it, so they're having to create kind of virtual viewing experiences, and he's kind of walking around his house with his mobile phone, showing people his living room and things like that.
So that makes a lot of sense. I do think as well, just generally in terms of format of social content, video is certainly on the up. As a result, trying to use it as the next best thing, like instead of in real life sort of experience, videos is the closest you can get to, I think.
Yeah, I've been actually I've been advising a guy, one of my favourite singers, a guy called Paul Weller. You're probably all far too young to know him, but his drummer has a guy called Steve Pilgrim, has his own plays guitar and has his own records and things as well. His entire tour has been cancelled, and therefore his income has been disappeared completely. So I've been advising him on how he's now doing kind of virtual online gigs effectively, and with a little kind of donate button to donate to his crew who've lost money, as well as the NHS, and giving the people watching the live gig the alternative. They can either donate if they want to a NHS type charity, or they can donate to help the band if they want to do so. But he's having to be really sensitive about not being seen to get people to give him money at the moment at the same time, hence having the two alternative donate buttons. But that's kind of a good example of someone's business model totally changing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, from Kath, we're trying to reinforce the message that we're still here and are excited about normal service resuming. Yep, we will get back to pretty much normal service. We just don't know when, I guess, at the moment. That's a challenge for everyone. So.
Should be fingers crossed rather than thumbs up, I think.
Yeah. Katie, we're a college. We've stopped promoting our courses as we don't know how they'll be running. Yeah, must be really tricky. Obviously, I don't really know anything about the sector personally, but
well, I know my wife works in a boarding school, and she has to send the bills out. So this week she's been sending the bills out for next term for the parents, not knowing which boys are going to be able to come back. It's a boys' boarding school, so they don't know how many are going to come back. I think a third of their students are overseas. They may not be able to get back even if they wanted to. So got absolutely no idea who's going to come back and who's not going to come back effectively.
Yeah. So so many things still. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it all does return to usual service. It's just a matter of when.
Yes.
So one from Jean. Yes, indeed, we had to be more careful with the messaging related to COVID-19. Yep. How our organisations support our audience, financial, academic, and well-being. Makes sense.
Interesting to know.
Working in university, we have to be mindful that our students are international.
Yeah.
And they are worried, scared, and anxious. So a little bit like you were just saying there, Nick. Yeah, international students, tricky time. Yeah, trying to travel home or get back to the UK and whatnot.
One of the things I think has been really interesting is the need to be seen to be a good employer. As well, which has probably been something that people haven't really. I mean, there are certain businesses, I won't want to say publicly, that have a bad reputation for treating their staff badly, anyway, but generally people don't think about it too much when they're buying a product online or from a particular retailer or staying in a particular hotel or something. But I think, you know, how they've chosen to treat their own employees in these tough times is going to have a big impact on the way people think about them going forward. So it's a difficult balance for the company to balance the financial books, not laying people off, at the same time as being seen as a responsible employer and looking after their own people as well. So interesting challenges.
Yeah, you're right, and I think people remember those kind of things, don't they? The goodwill, like there's so good feelings you have towards a brand because of something that they did, which might be related to their employees. You know, making sort of sharing those little good news stories where you can find them, just to help sort of enhance the brand. If you're not able to promote product or service, something else that you have to share. Therese, making us rethink the visual messaging. Yep. How do we continue to convey warmth and human contact? Yeah, it's tricky if you have a product or service which involves warmth and human contact.
Something I meant to say earlier on, actually, that it's weird when you watch TV now, if you see something was filmed a few weeks ago where the people are hugging or something, you think, get away. And quite a few of my clients have had to scrap the creative that they'd had planned because it just showed someone shaking hands or somebody, you know, embracing somebody, etc., and had to change that just because it seems totally inappropriate. So I mean, it'd be interesting whether that, you know, in 6 months' time, whether we'd be quite casual about shaking hands again, or whether suddenly that's gonna change forever. Who knows?
Yeah. We might keep doing the elbow shake rather than the handshake. Done a few of those so far. Hayley, I work in a college and we have a lot of unknowns at the moment. Yep. We're aiming to reassure students, but the information available to us is very unclear. Yeah, I guess it can be tricky if you don't know what you're working with, for sure. Rory, messages are about engagement and how they are doing rather than what we have on offer, as our locations are temporarily closed. Okay, yeah, if you've got venues that are not able to obviously be open and operating at the moment, obviously it's key to try to keep your audience engaged, to finding ways to do that.
Yeah, I think a great example of that is a lot of the kind of theatres and cinemas. So our local cinema, we've got an Everyman cinema in the town, and they did a virtual cinema screening on their Instagram page this weekend, where they got people to effectively watch a film collectively and then comment on it, even though they couldn't get, obviously not making any money from it, but it's getting people engaging with the brand still. And I noticed things like the National Theatre, for example, have made a whole lot of their previous recordings they're going to show live for people to watch. So people are still kind of engaging with the arts and still, you know, seeing them in a positive light. They're just using some of the old recorded content they've got, because obviously they can't get any income at the moment, but what they can do is keep the engagement so that in 6 months' time, you know, we still want to go to these places and still have a kind of positive reaction to them.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, isn't it? You don't want the sort of the next few months to be a time where you sort of losing some of the community that you had as engaged audience before. So yeah, coming up with ways, and it sounds quite a nice, fun thing to do actually. But yeah, nice way to keep people
absolutely
interested and engaged. Just got a few more, but I'm just conscious we've hit the hour mark. So a question from Simon. Is it bad taste to increase frequency of social posts now that a lot of us are working at home or in self-isolation? Could this affect branding?
I don't think so. I think frequency is absolutely fine. I think the messaging is the more important thing in terms of taste, but I think in terms of the frequency in which you do it, no, I think, and that, as I said before, such an easy thing to test. I mean, you know, the answer to most questions, I think, is try it and see, I guess, because you'll soon get feedback. And be honest with your audience, I would actually ask them, maybe put a poll on, like, you know, the end of the week, you might say, we've posted 3 times as often last week as we did normally. Is that too much, or is that okay? And, you know, just put a simple poll on the account, you know, and ask people. But I would say frequency, no problem at the moment.
Yeah, I agree, as long as what you're posting is relevant to the audience. Yeah, if you're posting relevant things and it's not a carbon copy of the previous post, yeah, frequency should.
Charlie, related to that, I would say, don't be afraid at the moment if you're sort of struggling to get content created because your team are all disparate, etc. If you've got some interesting thought leadership that was posted 3 months ago that's still relevant, don't be afraid to post and link back to the thing that you wrote 3 months beforehand as well. And I think people do underuse content that they've created. A university might produce something like, here are 5 reasons why you should go and study in Bristol, for argument's sake, or here are 5 top tips for recycling if you're a local council. Not many people would have seen them when it was first produced 3 months ago, so don't be afraid to repeat posts that you've done before, maybe with a different tweet, for example, but actually linking back to the same article you did before. So, amplification of old content is a good thing to do in times like this. Yeah, very good point. So I think we're probably going to wrap up there, just because I'm conscious of the time, and everyone's probably, if not hungry already, starting to get a little bit hungry coming to lunchtime. So Nick, I just want to say thanks a lot for joining us today. Been really insightful, and for everyone, you will get a link, I think sometime this afternoon, with the link to the recording and to PDF version of the slides, so you'll have the links to some of the resources that Nick shared today. So with that, big thanks for joining. Hope to see you again on another CrowdControlHQ webinar, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot. Dan, can I just quickly say as well, if I didn't ask anyone's questions and you've got anything burning, then feel free to send them on Twitter or LinkedIn or email as well, and I'm happy to kind of carry on the dialogue with anyone if they've got any other questions.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thank you.
Cheers.